All right. No fancy introductions, no music, no nothing. Just starting from scratch. So, for those of you who don't know me, I go by the name of Simple Coach on the D3 soccer boards. Did some work throughout the season this year, watching games, and I figured I would share some of my results. And basically, the principle of it was I wanted to look at teams and seeing if passing mattered. I know D3 soccer, we got a lot of discussions around, kick and run, heave it forward, what have you. And so I just wanted to look at a cross section of games to see, if passing mattered. And I probably watched well to into 200 games over the last 3 or 4 months. I probably counted passes on, I'll just say, 100 of those games. And basically what I did is I just took a defined period of time, 10 minutes. I broke it down into two groups, two 5-minute periods, and counted passes. I counted passes. I counted poor passes. So if a player made a pass that connected with his teammate, that was a good pass. If that pass didn't connect, when errant, was kicked out of bounds, I counted that as a bad pass. And I came up with this thing called the pass, what I call pass ratio. It's basically good passes versus bad passes. Sorry about her. And so I just wanted to look to see if there was a difference between teams that were playing what I consider good soccer. I'm sure that jersey up top makes you realize sort of what I liked. And I just wanted to see, does passing matter when you're a good team versus a lesser team? And so what I did is I ended up collecting all this data, and so I just wanted to share with you, share that data so that if you want it, you need it, by all means, I'll share my email address, and you can email me, and I will gladly send it along. So, as I mentioned, before I go into the spreadsheet, go by Simple Coach. I watched so many games. I ended up taking notes, and so I did for 45. All the games I watched were generally the first 45 minutes. People were giving me feedback, and so I started towards the end. I started doing full game notes, nothing too real sophisticated. I didn't get into player habits other than the obvious, just because that becomes really time consuming. So I just did overviews of what I thought, different ideas. Some of it was really, in hindsight, was harsh. Some of it might have been critical, but I'm come from a school of soccer where, even with my kids, we talk about being brutally honest about what we see on the soccer field and performance and all that stuff. And so that's give you some context to it. But if you go to d3soccer.com, the place that many of us come to love, and you see here where it says message boards, you click on the message boards. By all means, if you have not registered, do so. It's a great place to get information and feedback and a lot of different perspectives on the game. You'll see a section that says 2021 game notes. All of the game notes that I started collecting from the beginning of the season can be found here. And just to give you some, so this is what started. You could see these notes. Basically, just tried to capture, again, my bias, anything of that sort. and then different observations I had. They got longer as I dropped trying to do multiple games at once. I would just watch recorded games. And so, yeah, so I'm going to say there's probably easily 100 reviews of different games. And those games that were reviewed are in large part found on the spreadsheet. So anyhow, like I said, would be great for you to join D3 Soccer if you haven't yet. Girly, she's always got my 6. All right, so let's go into the spreadsheet. So, like I said, I just wanted to capture something about passing. There's a lot of bad connotations with, college soccer, and I just know D3 the best. So, having played D3, I decided that's where I would focus my attention. And what teams I chose, quite frankly, started out as random. So I did some games that I would not want to watch anymore. I watched games that I was familiar with teams, either myself or my sons as they went through the recruiting process. And then it sort of evolved into, quite frankly, which ones had the best video to watch, because some of these, I appreciate everyone's efforts in trying to recording some of these games to make them available, but field level, terrible video, I just wouldn't bother, because I just couldn't. It's hard to concentrate that long when it's bouncing around. And then it started to evolve over time, and I think it's also the spreadsheet will show. I just started to focus in on the teams that were what I considered fun or interesting to watch, right? That, towards the end, I was just watching, if you were close to winning your conference championship or tournament, if you're obviously ranked, since we did a whole fan poll ranking the top 20 teams, I started concentrating on that. So it ended up being a lot more selective. I've asked for input if anybody wants me to watch games. I enjoy it that much. I'll gladly do so and do a write-up, even off season. I just need to have access to a link so I could watch. So so let's go into the spreadsheet a little bit. And I know I'm blocking this a little bit for you, but as you can see, I was capturing the total number of passes in a 5-minute period, and then the total number of passes in a second 5-minute period that a team would make. So again, and I was pretty liberal on my definition of pass. There was, because I come from a school that, even corner kicks are passes if they're done right. So I was pretty liberal with that. Where I wasn't too liberal with was what I considered a bad pass. And there are instances where I chalked up a bad pass as a pass into traffic, or, a hospital ball given to somebody that they eventually won. But I was like, I would never tolerate that as a coach. So I would count that as a bad pass. Probably about halfway, maybe earlier, through someone on the soccer boards suggested that I count passes that are made in the attacking half. So I started to do that. Interestingly enough, I thought that became sort of one of the more interesting exercises that I saw, because there is a difference in possession, especially as you go on a team-by-team basis. There's a difference between a passing team that passes in the back, like you usually see center, keeper gives it to the center back hits it out wide, the outside back taps it back, he swings it across, it goes to another, And, you could do 5, 6, 7, 8 passes in a, couple minute stretch just by doing that. And of course, you're at your own 18. So seeing teams that actually did this type of work and actually got it across midfield became pretty valuable in my mind, just as an understanding of sort of what teams were doing. And so what I did is, you could see passes. Let me see if I could make this a little bit larger for you. Yep, there you go. So let's just look here. So Ohio Northern was was playing Westminster, both OAC. OAC team in Westminster. I'm not sure what their conference is, but so Ohio Northern in the first 5-minute period made 24 passes. Of those 24 passes, 4 were bad. So that makes 17% of those passes were considered bad. For this one in particular, I didn't count the passes in attack. I'll go through another one. And so the ratio ends up being 6-1. So for every 6 good passes, Ohio Northern would make 1 bad pass. In the second 5-minute period that I looked at, and by the way, those 5-minute periods were identical for every team. So, quite frankly, there was the first 10 minutes of every game when I thought everyone was probably their calmest and probably the most methodical. I counted those first 10 minutes, and it bears out that what you end up seeing is a decline in passing ability as the game goes on for a whole host of reasons. But and then in that second 5-minute period, Ohio Northern makes 25 good passes and makes 1 bad pass. That's 4% of those are bad passes. So on this one, their passing ratio is 25-1, right? So in this case, I just wanted to look, okay, so that doesn't really tell me not much, but what if I took a look at it and tried to aggregate and extrapolate? So I basically would add all of the good passes by the bad passes, same thing, come up with a percentage, and then okay, so what's the pass ratio? So for Ohio Northern, for this particular game, you are looking at a 9.8, so 9 or 10 passes. For every 9 or 10 passes, they would make sorry about her again, you would make one, they would make 1 bad pass. So that's pretty high when you start looking at the numbers. And then I said, okay, so if I decided what does that look like in terms of passes per minute, they would make about 5 passes per minute. So Ohio Northern in this game against Westminster would make 5 passes per minute. And if you just sort of extrapolated, they would make 441 passes in a game. And that is not a bad number, right? To me, again, sort of way I was brought up to play the game and understand the game, possession of the ball matters. There's different types of possession, but so to me, the higher these numbers, the higher these passes per game, and minimize the number of bad passes, you set yourself up for a greater likelihood of success, right? Let me take a look at a number down here, and then I'll explain the color codes for you. That has, okay, so MIT, which was a surprise for me. So MIT against Coast Guard. Well, I think the game was played at Coast Guard, which was a beautiful setting, field right on the river there in New London, I think. Beautiful. Would have loved to have played. So MIT against Coast Guard made 35 passes in the first 5 minutes, and they made 6 bad passes. So that's about a 17% differential, right? Or bad passes that they made. And then for a pass ratio, that would put it at about 5.8. So 5 to 6 passes, they would make 1 bad pass. And like I mentioned, I said, okay, let me count these. In this instance, I started counting passes in the attacking half. In this case, of those 35 passes, they made 7 of those in the attacking half. Second half, they had 42 passes. They made 6 bad passes. It's about 14%. So you could start to see some consistency, which again sort of bears itself out. They made a lot more passes and they made fewer bad passes. So in that instance, their pass ratio went up to 7. For every 7 passes, they would make 1 bad one, but still, again, consistent. But in this case, in this second 5 minutes, of those 42 passes, 24 were in the attacking half. So how does this bear out? Let me take a look. So in total, in those 10 minutes, 77 passes, they made 12 bad. So about 16% of their passes were bad. The number of passes in the attacking half were 31. So their average pass ratio is 6.4, so anywhere between 6 and 7. This is their attacking, what I called their attacking percentage. So what's the percentage of passes that were in the attacking half? So 40% of their passes were in the attacking half, which to me is pretty significant, right? Like you're spending half of your time with the ball in the attacking half, which is soccer's a game of goals. So how does that equate to? Okay, so that if you just do numbers again, it is 8. That makes 8 passes per minute, which is high, right? 8 passes per minute. So that would mean that in a game they would have the ball, they would pass the ball 693 times. Okay. What's interesting is these numbers are really good, but I had to figure out a way to sort of differentiate and sort of group for a whole other exercise I was doing. So I basically said, you know what? If you're a team that makes 7 passes, you're a 7-to-1 pass ratio, you're really good. So that's green up, right? So that's this is this first section. And of all my 211 games, or 211 instances where I counted, 25 of those teams exceeded that, right? In of itself, that's pretty good. Again, we can talk about competition. If you're a really good team playing against a really, not so good team, your numbers will skew in your favor. But, you look at the cross section and it is pretty telling who's in that ranking, right? And I'm sure people will have their own biases and who they support and whatnot. So the second grouping I did, which is 51 individual instances of games that I watched. So 51 of these teams, and I've watched some teams multiple times, which is, I cleaned it up a little bit for subsequent pages. I said, if your pass ratio is better than 5 but less than 7, you're sort of in this yellow zone, which is the middle tier. And of those 211 that teams that I counted, 51 of those are in this middle tier. And then the rest of them, quite frankly, 135 instances where I counted, fall into this bottom bucket, and those are anyone with below 5 passes, below a 5-to-1 pass ratio, right? So, and you could see some of it, again, some of these games were hard for me, hard to watch, but, all for science. So you could see, and it goes all the way down, which is interesting. Look at the last one on this one, which I'll reserve comment. Um, and you could see that last one that has a pass ratio. Oh, that's, yeah, one of those teams. That's actually, there's another one. Anyhow, so so that's the underlying data and what my thinking was on that. I then, just in case I send this to you, so I don't have to, I'd gladly explain it. I then just sort of extrapolated and I said, okay, give me all the individual instances by team, so I can then aggregate and come up with averages. So, this is just underlying raw data. This is it's ugly, but aggregated averages table. So this is the table where I said, take all of the games that the teams that I watched multiple times and come up with with numbers, an aggregated amount. And so that's what I did. And then here by team, I'll unhide this since, again, if you want it and I send it to you this way, I don't have to go into it. You can see here, there's the two halves, but I ended up hiding those because I thought this was more interesting, the aggregate amounts. And this ends up being a database of 95 teams with, again, this pass ratio. I'm sure statisticians who are watching this are probably like, this is terrible, but I'm a soccer guy, so this to me is a lot more than what I would have expected. So yeah, so interesting. So we know that in this case we have Amherst, who is playing, is it Chicago, I think. Let's go back to here. By the way, again, d3soccer.com. This is a great site. I just saw this earlier. So yeah, Amherst versus Chicago on the semifinals on Friday the 3rd. So if I come back to my spreadsheet, we do select Amherst versus Chicago. Okay, so again, it's sort of very interesting because having watched both teams, right? Chicago likes to possess the ball a little bit more, likes to move the ball a little bit more, keep it on the deck. And yeah, they do hold it, and they do look to spring their wingers when they get a chance or looking for a good through ball. But if you look, their pass ratio is, between 5 and 6, and then they'll make a bad one. But they spend close to half of their time in the opponent's half. And this is actually a great example to look at because I watched and sort of counted 3 of Chicago's games, the same amount for Amherst. So I watched 3 Amherst games, 3 Chicago games, and this is sort of what I came out with. On Amherst's side, which is, again, they're super effective. Their press is pretty gnarly if you're having to face it yourself. And they have right off the top of my head, I think it's number 9, number 23, and one other, I can't remember the number, but 3 players who are, again, the amount of guys that I watch, they could legitimately be All-Americans as far as I'm concerned. They're that effective. So, but what do they do with the ball every time they get it? They hoof it, right? And they compete, try to turn it over and go as quickly as they can to goal. So their numbers don't surprise me, right? Their passing is low. They have a high instance of bad passes. Possession to them is not of significance as other teams would be. So their passing ratio for the average of their 3 games is, 2 to 3 passes before they make a bad pass. And, which is, again, no surprise, their attack ratio is very low. It's 10% of their time is in the attack. But that's, again, because they go at speed. They lose the ball, they drop back, and then they do their thing to defend, right? And again, it's not a judgment. That's the way they play. Again, they're super effective. They're in the Final Four, but you could start to see these differentials happening. And so, in terms of passes per minute, what have you, if you just look, Chicago, again, I'm just going to come out. So if I'm just using the numbers, I'm going to say Chicago is going to possess the ball a lot more, and I just think Amherst is going to, I'll just say, sit back, win the ball, and get forward as quickly as they can. And they're going to try to just press the heck out of Chicago in the first 15, 20 minutes of each half that they do very effectively. The question is, can Chicago's passing cope with that? I think it ends up being a tight contest unless Chicago buckles under Amherst's press. So there's that one. And then, again, just for comparative purposes, it's Connecticut. Who was it? It's drawing a blank. Oh, yeah, Washington and Lee. So Connecticut and Washington and Lee. So Connecticut and Washington and Lee. Okay. Wow. And so, okay, Connecticut, Washington, and Lee. So here you go. Just to look at it, Connecticut just loves the ball a lot more, than Washington and Lee. Washington and Lee is just very effective in sort of getting up top again. To me, again, Connecticut is going to own the ball by a margin of 2-1 here, as far as I could tell. All right, or close to 2-1. I did watch Connecticut, and frankly, I watched them 7 times versus Washington and Lee 2 times. And I wanted to watch, and part of the problem here is that I can get the Connecticut games for some reason, but the Washington and Lee games disappear after they're played live, and so I'm watching so many games I couldn't watch them live, so that's part of my fault. So anyhow, and then the last thing I'll say, because I wanted to keep this short, and lo and behold, here I am 30 minutes later. If you look at the best teams in that top grouping, I'll just say they make between 5 and 6 passes a minute, and for about 400, 500 passes in or the high end of 400s in a game, right? Which is significant. So, this you want to own the ball as far as I'm concerned, and that's where you start your attack, by owning the ball. If you look at that middle tier, those yellows, these are the averages. So you can see their passes per game drop down to 4, 4.5, 5 passes per minute, and then you're looking at the passes per game is close to 400, right? So you can see that difference. And now where it really gets stark is when you start to go down to that bottom grouping and just sort of looking at what those passes are. You're looking at a higher percentage of bad passes, obviously, and a lower instance of passes per minute. 3 to 4 maybe, and so they don't have the ball. They wouldn't have the ball nearly as much. So for 303 passes in a game, and to me, like I said, possession, owning the ball is the start of your attack. So, and these are just the averages. And if you look, your average teams come in at 4 already lower. Or higher, excuse me, than by a significant amount, statistically, I guess, than your bottom team. So your average is a lot better than being on the bottom. So again, not making judgments on any of those teams. It's just sort of the stuff I found. So, okay, I rambled a lot. If you saw this, is great. I really appreciate it. Jackie says hello. She appreciates it. This is my email. If you want this spreadsheet, by all means, you could have it. Like I said, I didn't do all this work just for me. I'm hoping somebody reads it and gleans something, a coach or players, and again, happy to have a discussion about this stuff, about this, and happy to even get on the horn if that works. So thanks. I'll see you guys.